I'm Sarah, and I need you to picture this scene. Your husband just died. You're barely holding it together. Then, at a family gathering, your sister drops a bombshell that changes everything. She claims your husband left her $200,000 because he fathered her children in secret. Everyone believes her. The evidence looks real. But I knew something she didn't. Something that would destroy her lie completely. If family drama keeps you up at night, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to hear every detail of what happened next. My story starts 3 years ago when everything seemed perfect. I was 31, married to David for 8 years, and we had just bought our dream house. A beautiful colonial in the suburbs worth about $400,000. David worked in finance, making good money, and I ran a small catering business from home. We thought we had it all figured out. But there was one thing missing: kids. We'd been trying for 3 years with no luck. The doctors couldn't find anything wrong, but month after month, nothing happened. It was putting stress on our marriage that we didn't like to talk about. My younger sister Melissa was always around during this time. She was 3 years younger than me, single, and honestly, kind of a mess. She jumped from job to job, boyfriend to boyfriend. She was the type who always needed help with rent money or car repairs. Our parents had been enabling this behavior for years, and David and I often got pulled into helping her out. I tried to be supportive, but Melissa made it hard. She had this way of making comments that seemed innocent but felt like little cuts. When we couldn't get pregnant, she'd say things like, "Maybe it's a blessing. Kids are so expensive." When David got promoted, she'd joke that, "Some people have all the luck." Melissa had always been competitive with me, ever since we were kids. If I got good grades, she'd complain that school was stupid anyway. When I started my catering business, suddenly she wanted to be a chef too, though that lasted about 2 months. But the real problem started when Melissa announced she was pregnant. Not just pregnant, she was having twins. And she wouldn't tell anyone who the father was. Just said it was complicated and she'd rather handle it alone. I remember the day she told us. We were having Sunday dinner at our place, something our family did every week. Melissa was quieter than usual, picking at her food. Then she just blurted it out. "I'm pregnant. With twins. Due in March." David nearly choked on his water. I sat there stunned. Here we were, trying so hard to have one baby, and Melissa accidentally gets pregnant with two. "Who's the father?" I asked. Melissa's face got red. "It doesn't matter. He's not going to be involved." "It does matter," David said, trying to keep his voice calm. "You'll need support. Medical insurance, help with childcare." "I'll figure it out," she snapped. "I always do." That was Melissa. Never wanted to take responsibility, but always expected others to clean up her messes. The months that followed were strange. Melissa's pregnancy was difficult. She had morning sickness that lasted all day, high blood pressure, and had to quit her job at the dental office. Guess who ended up supporting her? Our parents, mostly, but David and I helped too. David would slip her money for groceries, pay her rent when she came up short, drive her to doctor appointments when I was busy with work. I started to feel like we were already parents, just not to our own kids. Melissa moved into a small apartment about 10 minutes from our house. David insisted we help her set up the nursery. I spent a weekend painting walls and assembling cribs while Melissa sat on the couch complaining about her back pain. "You're so good at this," she said, watching me hang pictures. "You'd make a great mom someday." The comment stung, but I didn't say anything. I was trying to be the supportive sister, even when it hurt. The twins were born on March 15th. 2 healthy boys, Jake and Mason. David and I were at the hospital within an hour. Melissa looked exhausted but happy. For the first time in months, she seemed genuinely grateful for our help. "I couldn't have done this without you too," she said, holding Jake while I held Mason. These boys are lucky to have you as aunt and uncle. I felt a warmth I hadn't experienced before. Maybe this would bring us all closer together. Maybe helping raise these babies would fill some of the emptiness David and I felt about not having our own kids. I was so wrong about what was coming. The first few months after the twins were born, everything seemed to settle into a routine. Melissa was a decent mother, though she leaned on us heavily for support. David and I would take turns watching the boys when she needed to run errands or just needed a break. I loved those babies like they were my own. When Jake had colic and cried for hours, I'd walk him around our house until he finally fell asleep. When Mason got sick with his first cold, I researched every natural remedy I could find. David was more reserved with them, but I figured that was just his personality. He wasn't naturally good with babies like I was. He'd hold them when needed, but he never seemed to really connect with them the way I did. Looking back now, I wonder if there was a reason for that distance. By the time the twins were 6 months old, Melissa's true colors started showing again. She'd drop them off at our house at a moment's notice, claiming she had job interviews or errands. But I'd see her social media posts showing her out at bars or shopping with friends. "She's taking advantage," I told David one evening after Melissa had left the twins with us for the third time that week. "She's struggling," David replied. "Being a single mom is hard. She's not even trying to be responsible. When's the last time she mentioned looking for the boy's father? They deserve to know who he is." David got quiet when I brought up the father. He'd change the subject or find some reason to leave the room. I thought he was just uncomfortable with the topic. The boys turned 1 in March. Melissa threw a small party at her apartment. Just family and a few of her friends. David seemed nervous the whole time, checking his phone constantly and barely talking to anyone. During the cake ceremony, Melissa made a speech that struck me as odd. "I want to thank everyone who helped me this year, especially David and Sarah. These boys are so lucky to have people who love them unconditionally." She was looking directly at David when she said unconditionally. There was something in her expression I couldn't read, almost like they shared a secret. That night, I asked David about it. "Did you notice how weird Melissa was acting at the party?" "Weird how?" "The way she kept looking at you during her speech. And you seemed uncomfortable all day." David was brushing his teeth, his back to me. "I was just tired. Long week at work." But I could see his reflection in the bathroom mirror. He looked worried, not tired. Things got stranger over the next few months. Melissa started making comments about how the boys had David's eyes, or how Jake had the same stubborn streak as David when he was a kid. Family resemblances aren't unusual, but something about the way she said it felt deliberate. Then there were the money issues. Melissa was always broke, but suddenly she started talking about bigger financial problems. Her car needed major repairs. Her rent was going up. The boys needed new clothes and toys. "I wish their father would step up," she'd say whenever money came up. "He has a responsibility to support them." "Have you tried to contact him?" I'd ask. "It's complicated," was always her answer. David started working late more often. He'd come home stressed and distracted. When I'd ask about his day, he'd give vague answers and change the subject. I thought maybe he was having problems at work. The finance industry was getting more competitive, and David was under pressure to bring in new clients. But there were other signs that didn't add up. He started password protecting his phone, something he'd never done before. He'd step outside to take certain calls. He seemed jumpy whenever Melissa's name came up in conversation. The breaking point came in September, about 18 months after the twins were born. I was cleaning out David's jacket pockets before taking it to the dry cleaner when I found a receipt from a jewelry store. Expensive earrings, purchased 3 weeks earlier. I hadn't received any jewelry recently. When David got home, I confronted him about it. "Are these for me?" I asked, showing him the receipt. His face went white. Those are for Melissa." For her birthday. Melissa's birthday was in June. It's an early Christmas present then. David, these earrings cost $300. Since when do we spend that kind of money on Melissa for Christmas? He couldn't give me a straight answer. Just kept saying Melissa had been having a hard time and deserved something nice. That night, I couldn't sleep. Everything felt wrong, but I couldn't put the pieces together. Why was David being secretive? Why was Melissa making those strange comments? And why did I feel like everyone knew something I didn't? I was about to find out that my instincts were right. But the truth was worse than anything I could have imagined. October 12th started like any normal day. David left for work early because he had a client presentation. I was planning to spend the afternoon working on a catering order for a corporate lunch later that week. At 2:30 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. Is this Sarah Mitchell, David Mitchell's wife? Yes. Who is this? This is Officer Reynolds with the state police. Ma'am, your husband has been in an accident. The world stopped. Everything went quiet except for the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. What kind of accident? Is he okay? Ma'am, I need you to come to General Hospital as soon as possible. Can you drive, or do you need someone to come get you? I knew from his tone that it was bad. Really bad. The drive to the hospital was a blur. I kept calling David's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it might not be as serious as it sounded. But when I got to the hospital and saw the look on the doctor's face, I knew. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Dr. Chen. Your husband was in a multi-car accident on Route 95. A semi-truck ran a red light and hit his car on the driver's side. Is he alive? The pause before he answered told me everything. I'm sorry. He died on impact. There was nothing we could do. David was gone. Just like that. No warning. No chance to say goodbye. 1 minute I was planning dinner. The next minute I was a widow at 32 years old. The next few hours were a nightmare of paperwork, phone calls, and arrangements. I had to identify David's body, contact his work, call family members. Melissa was one of the hardest calls to make. Despite all the weirdness lately, she and David had always gotten along well. This would upset her. Sarah, why are you calling in the middle of the day? Melissa, I need you to sit down. Something's happened. When I told her about the accident, she screamed. Not just cried, but screamed like someone had physically hurt her. It went on for so long that I thought she'd dropped the phone. Melissa? Melissa, are you there? How? She finally managed to ask. How did this happen? I explained what little I knew about the accident. Melissa kept asking questions. What time did it happen? Which hospital? Had I seen his body? She seemed almost frantic for details. I need to see him, she said. I need to come to the hospital. Melissa, you can't see him right now. I had to identify him, and it was hard. But I need to say goodbye. Her reaction seemed extreme, even for someone losing a brother-in-law they were close to. But grief makes people act strangely, so I didn't think too much about it at the time. The funeral was 5 days later. David's co-workers, our neighbors, college friends, everyone came to pay their respects. The church was packed. Melissa sat in the front row with me, holding both twins on her lap. She cried through the entire service, sometimes so loudly that people turned to stare. During the graveside ceremony, she collapsed. Just fell to her knees, sobbing while I stood there feeling numb and empty. Several people had to help her to her feet. He was so important to us, she kept saying. He was so important. Again, it seemed like an extreme reaction, but I figured she was thinking about how much David had helped her since the twins were born. After the funeral, people came back to our house. Friends brought food, shared memories of David, offered to help with anything I needed. Melissa stayed late after most people had left. She sat on our couch nursing Mason while Jake played with toys on the floor. "What are you going to do now?" she asked. "I don't know. Figure out the finances, maybe sell the house. It's too big for just me." "You're going to sell this house?" "I can't afford the mortgage on just my income." David had life insurance, but it's not enough to keep this place long term. Melissa got quiet. She had this look on her face like she was calculating something. "Maybe we could work something out," she said. "I could move in and help with expenses." The suggestion caught me off guard. Living with Melissa and two toddlers was not something I'd ever considered. "I appreciate the offer, but I think I need some time alone to figure things out." "But we're family now. We should stick together." Something about the way she said family bothered me, but I couldn't put my finger on why. Over the next few weeks, Melissa kept bringing up the house. She'd mention how hard it was to afford her apartment rent, how the boys needed more space to play, how it didn't make sense for me to be alone in such a big house. I started avoiding her calls, but then came the reading of David's will, and everything changed. David and I had updated our wills 2 years earlier when we bought the house. Nothing complicated. Everything went to the surviving spouse, and if we both died, our assets would go to charity since we didn't have kids. The appointment with David's lawyer, Mr. Peterson, was scheduled for 3 weeks after the funeral. I expected it to be routine: sign some papers, transfer accounts into my name, maybe discuss tax implications. Melissa asked if she could come along. "Why would you need to be there?" I asked. David might have left something for the boys. He loved them so much. I doubted David had changed his will without telling me, but I said she could come. Maybe it would give her some closure. Mr. Peterson's office was downtown in an old brick building. He'd been David's lawyer since college and handled all our legal paperwork over the years. "Sarah, Melissa, please sit down," he said, gesturing to chairs across from his desk. "I'm sorry for your loss." David was a good man. He opened a file folder and pulled out several documents. David's will is fairly straightforward. The house, bank accounts, investment portfolio, and life insurance all go to Sarah as the surviving spouse. I nodded. This was what I'd expected. "However," Mr. Peterson continued, "David did make some changes about 6 months ago that I need to discuss with you." My stomach dropped. "Changes? What changes?" "He set up a small trust fund for Melissa's children, $25,000 to be split between the two boys, accessible when they turn 18. I looked at Melissa, who seemed surprised but not shocked. "That's very generous," she said quietly. "There's more," Mr. Peterson said. "David also specified that if anything happened to him, Sarah would become the boys' legal guardian in the event that Melissa was unable to care for them." "What?" Melissa stood up abruptly. "He can't do that." "Those are my children." "It's just a backup provision," Mr. Peterson explained. "Only if something happened to you, or if you were declared unfit. It's actually quite common for single parents to name trusted family members as potential guardians." I was stunned. David had never mentioned any of this to me. When had he made these changes? And why? "Did he say why he wanted to set up the trust fund?" I asked. Mr. Peterson looked uncomfortable. He mentioned feeling responsible for his nephew's financial security. Said he wanted to make sure they had money for college. Melissa sat back down, but she looked upset. "He should have discussed this with me first." "I'm sure he meant well," I said, though I was confused about why David had done this without talking to me. After we left the lawyer's office, Melissa was quiet during the drive back to her apartment. "Are you okay with the guardian thing?" she finally asked. "Melissa, that's only if something happens to you. Which it won't. But if it did, would you really want to raise my boys?" The question surprised me. Of course I would. They're family. Even though they're not really your nephews? I looked at her sharply. What do you mean by that? Nothing. Just, you know, they're not blood relatives to you. Something about her tone bothered me, but I didn't push it. We were both emotional and grieving, but that night I couldn't stop thinking about David's secret will changes. Why hadn't he told me about the trust fund? It was a significant amount of money. And the guardianship clause. When had he even had time to set that up without me knowing? I started looking through David's papers at home, bank statements, insurance policies, anything that might explain his recent decisions. That's when I found something that made my blood run cold. Hidden in his desk drawer, underneath old tax returns, was a medical report, dated 8 months earlier, a paternity test. The results showed that David Mitchell was the biological father of Jacob and Mason Parker. Melissa's last name was Parker. Jake and Mason Parker. My husband was the father of my sister's twins. Everything suddenly made sense. The secretive behavior, the expensive gifts, the changes to his will. David had been having an affair with Melissa. But as I sat there staring at the test results, one thought kept running through my mind. If David knew he was the father, why didn't he leave them more money? Why didn't he claim them publicly? And why did the dates on the paternity test seem wrong? I was about to discover that what I'd found was just the beginning of a much bigger deception. I didn't sleep that night. I kept staring at the paternity test results, trying to make sense of what I'd found. David was the father of Melissa's twins. But something about the timeline didn't add up. The test was dated February 15th, about a month before the boys were born. If David knew he was the father, why had he been so distant with them? Why hadn't he claimed them openly? And there was something else bothering me. The test showed David as the father, but I'd never known him to cheat. We had our problems with fertility, but our marriage was solid. When would he have had an affair with Melissa? I needed answers. The next morning, I called the testing company listed on the report. After being transferred 3 times, I finally got someone who could help. I'm calling about a paternity test that was done in February. I'm the widow of one of the participants. I'll need some identifying information to discuss any results. I gave them David's details and the case number from the report. Yes, I see the file. What questions do you have? When was the test actually performed? The report is dated February 15th, but when were the samples collected? There was a pause while she looked through the file. The samples were collected on February 10th. Adult saliva sample and infant blood samples from the hospital. Hospital samples? Yes, it looks like the infant samples were collected shortly after birth at General Hospital. So the test had been done when the boys were newborns. That meant David had suspected he might be the father from the very beginning. But there was still something that didn't make sense. Can you tell me who ordered the test? Another pause. The account was set up by Melissa Parker. She's listed as the person who submitted all the samples. Melissa had ordered the test, not David. I hung up feeling more confused than ever. If Melissa had ordered the test and it proved David was the father, why had she kept it secret? Why hadn't she demanded child support or asked him to be involved in the boys' lives? I decided to dig deeper into David's papers. I went through every file, every folder, every receipt I could find. What I discovered painted a very different picture than what I'd initially thought. First, I found credit card statements showing regular payments to Melissa starting about 2 months after the twins were born. Not just occasional help with expenses, consistent monthly payments of $1,500. Then I found text messages David had saved on his computer. Messages between him and Melissa that went back over a year. Melissa: the boys need new car seats. The store said $300 for both. David: I'll transfer the money tonight. Melissa: Jake has another ear infection. Doctor visit plus antibiotics, $200. David. Already sent it. Melissa. I know this is hard, but they're your sons too. David. I understand my responsibilities. The messages showed a pattern. Melissa would text about expenses for the boys, and David would send money immediately. But his responses were always short, almost businesslike. There was no warmth, no fatherly affection. And then I found the message that changed everything. Melissa. I have the test results. You know what this means? David. I need time to process this. Melissa. There's nothing to process. You're their father. You have obligations. David. This doesn't have to destroy two families. We can work something out privately. Melissa. As long as you take care of them financially, I won't say anything. But if you try to abandon them like their real father did, I'll make sure everyone knows the truth. I read that exchange 5 times before it sank in. Melissa was blackmailing David. But blackmailing him about what exactly? The messages made it sound like David hadn't known about the affair until Melissa told him. Like it was news to him that he might be the father. I kept reading through the saved messages, looking for more clues. And then I found the smoking gun. Melissa. You were so drunk that night after Sarah's birthday party. You probably don't even remember. David. I remember enough to know this is wrong. Melissa. What's wrong is that you got me pregnant and now you want to pretend it never happened. David. I was grieving my marriage problems and made a terrible mistake. But I won't let you use that to destroy my life. Melissa. Then you better keep paying. Those boys deserve a father's support even if they can't know who he really is. My hands were shaking as I read this exchange. David had been drunk. He'd made a terrible mistake. This wasn't an ongoing affair, it was a one-night mistake that Melissa had used to trap him. But there was still something that didn't add up. When was my birthday party? I tried to remember the timeline. My birthday was in April. The twins were born in March. If Melissa got pregnant at my birthday party, the timing would be right for a March birth. But I remembered that party clearly. It was at our house. David hadn't been drunk. He'd been the designated driver. And Melissa had left early because she said she wasn't feeling well. The more I thought about it, the more confused I became. The messages suggested David believed he was the father and had been paying Melissa to keep it quiet. But the details didn't match my memories of that time period. I needed to see the original paternity test report, not just the results page I'd found. There had to be more information that would help me understand what really happened. But first, I needed to confront Melissa. Because if David really was the father of her boys, she had some serious explaining to do about why she'd kept it secret all this time. And if he wasn't the father, then Melissa had been running a very sophisticated con game. Either way, I was about to learn that my sister was not the person I thought she was. I called Melissa that afternoon and asked if I could come over. I needed to see her face when I asked about the paternity test. Of course, she said. The boys would love to see their Aunt Sarah. That phrase hit differently now. Were they really my nephews? Or were they David's sons that I'd been unknowingly helping to raise? Melissa's apartment was small, but clean. The boys were napping when I arrived, which was perfect. I needed to have this conversation without interruptions. How are you holding up? Melissa asked, making tea in her tiny kitchen. That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. I've been going through David's papers, trying to get his affairs in order. Find anything interesting? The casual way she asked that question made me wonder if she knew what I'd discovered. Actually, yes. I found some things that confused me. I pulled out the paternity test results and placed them on her coffee table. Melissa's face went completely white. Where did you find that? In David's desk, hidden under some old tax returns. Melissa sat down heavily, staring at the paper like it might explode. I can explain, she said quietly. I hope so. Because according to this, David was the biological father of Jake and Mason. He was. And you never told me. It's complicated. No, Melissa, it's not complicated. Either David was having an affair with you and fathered your children, or he wasn't. Which is it? Melissa started crying. Not the dramatic sobs I'd seen at the funeral, but quiet tears that seemed genuine. He was their father, she said. But it wasn't an affair. Not really. What does that mean? It was one night. Just one night when everything went wrong. She took a shaky breath and started talking. It was about 2 years ago. You and David were going through that rough patch, remember? You were fighting all the time about kids and fertility treatments. I did remember. We'd been stressed about money and the failure of our latest IVF attempt. We were barely talking to each other for a few weeks. David came over to my apartment one evening. You two had gotten into a big fight, and he needed someone to talk to. What kind of fight? Something about the fertility doctor wanting to try a different approach that would cost even more money. David was worried about the debt you were accumulating. That sounded familiar. We'd had several fights about money during that period. So he came to talk to you? He was really upset, Sarah. Like, broken up about it. He felt like he was failing you as a husband because he couldn't give you the kids you wanted. And I gave him some wine to calm down. Maybe too much wine. We were both drinking and talking about how unfair life was. I could see where this was going, but I let her continue. One thing led to another. It just happened. We were both lonely and drunk, and it felt like comfort in the moment. You slept with my husband. One time. And we both regretted it immediately. David left that night and we agreed never to talk about it again. But then you got pregnant. I didn't know right away. By the time I realized I was pregnant, several weeks had passed. I wasn't sure if the timing was right for it to be David's. So you ordered a paternity test. After the boys were born, yes. I needed to know for sure. Melissa was looking down at her hands, not meeting my eyes. And when the test showed David was the father, I told him. He was devastated, said it would destroy your marriage if you found out. So you decided to blackmail him instead. Melissa's head snapped up. It wasn't blackmail. Those boys deserved support from their father. I saw the text messages, Melissa. You threatened to tell everyone if he didn't pay you. I was trying to protect everyone. You didn't need to know that David had cheated. David didn't want his reputation ruined. And the boys needed financial support. So you took money from him for over a year and let me believe some mystery man had gotten you pregnant and abandoned you. I thought it was the best solution for everyone. I stared at her, trying to process everything she'd told me. Part of me was relieved that it hadn't been an ongoing affair, but I was also furious that she'd been lying to me all this time. There's something else, I said. David changed his will 6 months ago. He left money for the boys and named me as their potential guardian. Melissa looked surprised. He never told me about that. Maybe he was planning to tell me the truth eventually. Maybe. We sat in silence for a few minutes. The boys started stirring in their bedroom, making the little noises kids make when they're waking up from naps. I don't know. I need time to process all of this. Are you going to tell people? About David being their father? I thought about it. What would be the point? David was dead. The boys were too young to understand. It would only hurt his memory and our families. I don't think so. But Melissa, the payments stop now. I can't afford to support you the way David did. I understand. And I want to be involved in the boys' lives. Really involved. Not just as the aunt who babysits sometimes. If they're David's sons, then they're the only family I have left. Melissa nodded. Of course. They love you. As I was getting ready to leave, Jake and Mason woke up. They toddled into the living room, rubbing their eyes and looking adorable in their little pajamas. Jake climbed into my lap immediately, like he always did. Mason was more cautious, but he came over for a hug too. Looking at them, I could see David in their features. Jake had his eyes. Mason had his stubborn chin. How had I missed the resemblance before? Aunt Sarah, Jake said in his 2-year-old voice. Play blocks? Not today, sweetie. Aunt Sarah has to go home. Come back soon? Yes, I promised. I'll come back soon. As I drove home, I felt empty and confused. In the span of a few hours, I'd learned that my husband had cheated on me, fathered 2 children, and been paying blackmail money for over a year. But I'd also learned that David had tried to do the right thing, even if his methods were flawed. He'd supported his sons financially, he'd planned for their future in his will, and he'd tried to protect our marriage by keeping the secret. I thought the worst was behind me. I thought I finally understood what had really happened. I was wrong. The real bomb was still waiting to explode. 6 weeks after David's funeral, my mother-in-law decided to host a family barbecue. She said it would be good for everyone to come together and remember happy times. I didn't want to go. The idea of pretending everything was normal while sitting across from Melissa felt impossible. But family guilt is powerful, and I eventually agreed to show up. The barbecue was at David's aunt and uncle's house. They had a big backyard with a pool, perfect for family gatherings. About 20 people came, David's extended family, some family friends, Melissa with the twins, and our parents. I brought a pasta salad and tried to blend into the background. People were kind but careful around me, the way they are with new widows. Lots of gentle questions about how I was doing and offers to help with anything I needed. Melissa seemed different that day, more confident than I'd seen her since the twins were born. She was dressed nicer than usual, and she'd gotten her hair done. The boys looked adorable in matching outfits. For the first hour, everything seemed normal. People ate, kids played in the pool, the adults sat around talking about work and weather and safe topics. Then Melissa asked everyone to gather around the picnic table. She said she had an announcement to make. My stomach dropped. Surely she wouldn't tell everyone about David being the father. Not here, not like this. Thank you all for being here today, Melissa began, holding Jake on her hip while Mason played at her feet. These past few weeks have been really hard losing David. People nodded sympathetically. David's aunt wiped her eyes. But I've been keeping something from all of you that I think you deserve to know. I felt like I was going to throw up. This was it. She was going to tell everyone about the affair and the paternity test. Jake and Mason aren't just David's nephews through marriage, Melissa continued, her voice getting stronger. They're his sons. The silence that followed was deafening. 20 people staring at Melissa with their mouths open, trying to process what she'd just said. David and I had a relationship about 2 years ago. It was brief, but these boys are the result. David's mother gasped and sat down hard in her chair. Melissa, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Maybe we should discuss this privately. No, she said firmly. I'm tired of keeping secrets. David was their father, and everyone deserves to know. David's uncle stood up. Are you saying David was cheating on Sarah? It happened during a difficult time in their marriage. It wasn't planned, but it happened. I could see the family members looking between Melissa and me, trying to figure out if I'd known about this. Does Sarah know? David's aunt asked. She found out recently, Melissa said. David left some papers that confirmed everything. This was spiraling out of control. I needed to stop it before she said something that couldn't be taken back. Melissa, I think we should... Actually, she interrupted. There's more. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded document. My heart sank. I recognized the legal letterhead from across the yard. Before David died, he updated his will. He wanted to make sure his sons were taken care of. She held up the paper like it was evidence in a court case. David left $200,000 for Jake and Mason, half of everything he and Sarah owned. The gasps around the yard were audible this time. David's mother looked like she was about to faint. My own parents, who had been quiet until now, both stood up. "That can't be right," my father said. "David would never." "It's all here in black and white," Melissa said, waving the document. "Signed and notarized. David knew he had a responsibility to his children." I stared at her in complete shock. This was not the conversation we'd had at her apartment. This was not the story she'd told me about keeping secrets and protecting everyone. And that document she was holding, I'd never seen it before in my life. "Melissa," I said slowly, "can I see that will?" "Of course," she said, walking over and handing it to me with a confident smile. "It's your copy anyway." I took the paper and scanned it quickly. It looked official. Legal language, proper formatting, what appeared to be David's signature at the bottom. But something was wrong. The date was from last month, 3 weeks after David died. "This will is dated after David's death," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "That's impossible," Melissa said, but her confident expression faltered slightly. "October 30th, I read from the document. "David died on October 12th. He couldn't have signed anything on October 30th. The yard went completely silent except for the sound of kids splashing in the pool, oblivious to the drama unfolding around them. Melissa's face went red. That must be a mistake. A typo. A typo? I looked at the document again. The entire will is dated October 30th. The signature is dated October 30th. This whole thing was created after my husband died. David's uncle stepped forward. "Melissa, what's going on here?" There must be some confusion. David definitely left money for the boys. He told me so." "When did he tell you that?" I asked. "Before he died. He said he was updating his will." "Then where is the real will?" "Because this," I held up the document, "is clearly fake." The word fake hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Everyone was staring at Melissa, waiting for an explanation. "It's not fake," she said, but her voice was shaking now. "David promised those boys would be taken care of." By forging his signature on a document dated after his death? I didn't forge anything. Then who did? Melissa looked around the yard at all the faces staring at her. Her confident announcement had turned into a public interrogation, and she was losing badly. "I need to go," she said suddenly, scooping up Mason and calling for Jake. "Come on, boys. We're leaving." "Melissa, wait," my mother said, standing up. "Let's talk about this calmly." "There's nothing to talk about. David was their father, and he wanted them provided for. If Sarah won't honor that, then I'll have to take legal action." "With a forged will?" I asked. "It's not forged," she shouted, then immediately looked like she regretted raising her voice in front of the kids. Jake started crying, confused by all the tension. Mason clung to Melissa's leg, sensing something was wrong. "You know what?" I said, folding the fake will and putting it in my purse. "Let's let the lawyers sort this out. I'm sure they'll be very interested to see this document." Melissa's eyes went wide. "You can't, there's no need to involve lawyers." "Oh, I think there's every need. You just accused my dead husband of fathering your children and forging his will to leave you money. That sounds like something lawyers should definitely look into." The crowd around us was watching this exchange like a tennis match. Back and forth, accusation and counter-accusation. "Sarah," David's mother said quietly, "is it true?" "About David being their father?" I looked at this woman who had lost her son just weeks ago and was now learning that everything she thought she knew about his life might be a lie. I don't know, I said honestly, but I intend to find out. Melissa gathered up the twins and headed for the gate. This isn't over, she said as she left. No, I agreed. It's not. After she left, the party was obviously over. People made awkward small talk for a few more minutes, then started making excuses to leave. Nobody knew what to say about what they'd just witnessed. David's parents stayed behind to help clean up. His mother kept looking at me with sad, confused eyes. Do you really think David? She started to ask, then stopped. I don't know what to think anymore, I said. But I'm going to find out the truth. What if the truth is worse than not knowing? I thought about that question as I drove home. What if David really had cheated? What if those boys really were his sons? What if everything I thought I knew about my marriage was wrong? But then I thought about that fake will, dated 3 weeks after David's death. Whatever the truth was about the paternity, Melissa was definitely lying about something, and I was done being lied to. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the scene at the barbecue, about Melissa's confident announcement turning into panic when I pointed out the date on the will. Something wasn't right about any of this. The next morning, I called Mr. Peterson, David's real lawyer. Sarah, how can I help you? I need to ask you about David's will. Did he make any changes beyond what you showed me? Any other versions? No. The will we reviewed was the final version. David made those changes 6 months ago and never contacted me again after that. So he definitely didn't update it in the weeks before his death? Absolutely not. Why do you ask? I explained what had happened at the barbecue, including the forged will with the impossible date. Mr. Peterson was quiet for a long moment. Sarah, I think you need to contact the police. What you're describing sounds like fraud. I was afraid you'd say that. Your sister is attempting to make false claims against your husband's estate. That's a serious crime. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the fake will. The more I looked at it, the more obvious it became that something was wrong. The signature didn't look quite right. The language wasn't the same as David's real will. But there was something else bothering me about the whole situation. If Melissa really believed David was the father of her twins, why would she need to forge a will? Why not just file for child support or claim inheritance rights through paternity? Unless she wasn't sure David was actually the father. I decided to do some investigating of my own before involving the police. First, I called the paternity testing company again. I called last week about a test done in February. I have some additional questions. What can I help you with? The samples that were submitted. Can you tell me exactly what was provided? I heard typing on the other end. Adult saliva sample and 2 infant blood samples, all submitted by Melissa Parker. And the adult sample? Was it definitely from David Mitchell? More typing. The sample was labeled as being from David Mitchell, but we have no way to verify that independently. We test whatever samples are provided to us. My heart started racing. So if someone submitted a different person's saliva but labeled it as David Mitchell, you wouldn't know. That's correct. We rely on the honesty of the person submitting the samples. I hung up feeling dizzy. What if Melissa had submitted someone else's DNA and claimed it was David's? What if the whole paternity test was fake? But why would she do that? And whose DNA would she have used? I needed to find out more about Melissa's life around the time the twins were conceived. Who was she dating? Where was she spending her time? I started with social media. Melissa wasn't careful about her privacy settings, so I could scroll back through years of posts. Around the time she would have gotten pregnant, there were lots of pictures of her at bars and parties. She was dating someone named Marcus, based on the photos. They looked serious. Couple selfies, vacation pictures, posts about anniversaries. But then suddenly, all the posts about Marcus stopped. Right around the time Melissa would have started showing, I looked Marcus up on social media. His profile was public too. Around the same time Melissa's posts about him stopped, he started posting about moving across the country for a new job. Coincidence? Or had Marcus run when he found out Melissa was pregnant? I kept scrolling through Marcus's profile and found something interesting. He worked in finance, just like David. They had similar builds, similar coloring. From a distance, their photos looked remarkably similar. What if Melissa had gotten pregnant by Marcus, he'd abandoned her, and she'd decided to pin it on David instead? David, who was successful and stable and married to her sister? But how would she get David's DNA for the test? I thought back to the time period when the test would have been done. The twins were born in March, so the test happened shortly after that. What was happening in our lives then? David had gotten sick around that time. A bad flu that knocked him out for a week. Melissa had come over to help take care of him while I was dealing with a big catering job. She'd brought him soup, helped him with medicine, even did some cleaning while I was at work. She would have had access to his toothbrush, his drinking glasses, anything with his saliva on it. The pieces were starting to fit together, but I needed proof. I decided to order a new paternity test myself. I still had some of David's things, his toothbrush, some clothes that might have hair on them, and I could get samples from the boys easily enough during my next babysitting session. If David really was the father, the new test would confirm it. If he wasn't, then Melissa had been running a long con game, and I was about to expose her. But first, I had one more stop to make. I needed to find Marcus and hear his side of the story. Because if my theory was right, Melissa had been lying about everything from the very beginning, and if she'd forge one document, she'd certainly forge another. The truth was finally going to come out. As I sit here now, 6 months after that family barbecue, I can tell you that the truth was exactly what I suspected. The new paternity test came back negative. David was not the father of Jake and Mason. When confronted with this evidence, Melissa finally broke down and confessed everything. Marcus was the real father. When he found out she was pregnant, he got scared and took that job across the country, leaving her with nothing. Melissa had seen David's success, our nice house, our stable life, and decided she deserved some of that. She'd used his illness as an opportunity to steal DNA samples and fake the first paternity test. The fake will was created by a friend of hers who worked in graphic design. They'd found samples of David's signature online and tried to recreate it. When David started receiving those blackmail texts, he was genuinely confused. But he was also terrified that people would believe Melissa's lies, so he started paying her to keep quiet while he tried to figure out what to do. The $300 earrings? They weren't a gift. They were payment for Melissa's silence about allegations that weren't even true. Melissa was arrested for fraud, forgery, and extortion. She served 8 months in jail and lost custody of the twins temporarily while she was incarcerated. The boys are doing well. They're staying with our parents while Melissa gets her life back together. I still see them regularly, not because they're David's sons, but because I love them, and they're innocent victims in all of this. As for me, I'm rebuilding my life one day at a time. I've learned some hard lessons about trust, about family, and about the lengths some people will go to when they're desperate. David wasn't perfect, but he wasn't the cheater I thought he was either. He was just a man trying to protect his reputation from false accusations. The hardest part? I'll never get to tell him I'm sorry for doubting him, even for a moment. But I can honor his memory by making sure the truth is known. Sometimes family isn't who you think it is. Sometimes the people closest to you are capable of things you never imagined. And sometimes the only way to protect yourself is to ask the hard questions and demand real answers. If you're dealing with family drama or someone trying to take advantage of your grief, document everything. Ask for proof. Trust your instincts. And remember, just because someone is family doesn't mean they have your best interests at heart. Thanks for listening to my story. I hope it helps someone else avoid the pain I went through. Sometimes the truth hurts, but lies hurt more. And the truth? The truth always comes out in the end. If this story resonated with you, or you know somebody that was in a similar situation, let me know in the comments below and like the video. May your truths come out too.